Hi everyone, my name's Louise and I received a living kidney donation from a longtime girlfriend of mine 11 and a half years ago. I was diagnosed at 19 with polycystic kidney disease and lived a pretty normal life in my 20s and 30s, went to university, I used to run marathons, traveled around the world, I competitively sailed, I summited Machu Picchu and Kilimanjaro and tried to live a fairly normal life. But in my mid 30s, really started to notice the decline in my kidneys. Probably the most noticeable was just the chronic fatigue and lack of energy, which certainly impacted the long distance running. I had to stop a lot of those activities as my function continued to decline. As my function continued to decline, doctor's appointments that were once a year eventually became once a month. They started giving me EPO shots just to give me a little boost of energy. I had to step down from a director role because I just didn't have the energy for the full-time job that I was in at the time. I stopped most of my sport activities because I just didn't have the energy. Often I'd go home and I could easily sleep 10, 12 hours and, I'd get up, I'd eat a little bit and then I'd go back to bed and then I'd go to work, for maybe 8 hours, but it was a real struggle. The other noticeable thing was, I just started getting this metallic taste in my mouth because kidneys remove waste. And so just even eating or drinking water just didn't, nothing tasted good because of the waste buildup that was in my system. I'd grown up watching my mom go on dialysis for many years and then eventually get a transplant through a living donor. It was her sister, and she lived 20 years with that donation. And so I knew that both of those were treatment options. I had certainly registered on the Oregon waitlist registry when I was down to about 15% function. And it wasn't until I was down to 10% function that my nephrology and transplant team indicated that it was a possibility to reach out to people to be living donors. But I think the main thing I struggled with was how do you even ask someone to be a living donor? And so initially I reached out to family who had their own personal situations to deal with. And so then it was reaching out to friends who had seen this slow decline in my health, but it was kind of difficult to bring it up in a conversation like, hey, do you want to give me your kidney? It just wasn't something that was really talked about a lot, even 10 years ago. And so I struggled a little bit with how to even broach the subject. Even with my fears, I decided that I really wanted to try and find a living donor because I was 10 when my mom started dialysis, and I remember being really terrified watching her on the machine, seeing the needles, and I think that image really stuck in my head, even in my late 30s, early 40s, just thinking that that was going to be my life, and more importantly, just the quality or lack of quality of life that that would empower, and knowing that the traveling I love to do and the sports I love to do and all those things likely would be significantly impacted if I was on dialysis, whereas a living donor was going to be sort of the fastest path to getting my life back to some semblance of normalcy. I was extremely fortunate and humbled to have 6 friends approach me to get tested. One of them was Kana, who lived close by at the time, and she had just had a baby, premature birth. And I remember her saying, how she wanted to get tested. And I was so adamant about the fact that while I was grateful, I just didn't want her to have any risk in raising this little baby boy that she had just delivered, and I just couldn't, as much as I was sick and was, hopeful to find a living donor, I really didn't want to put her at risk at being a mother, to her new son. And it was a really, struggling time for me because I wanted to make sure she was okay, but also I was selfishly looking after my own health and wondering how could I also be healthy at the same time. On the day of her surgery, as I was being wheeled into the operating room, there certainly was a sense of hope. There was a sense of worry. I'd seen Kana leave 2 hours before that and was just praying and hoping that she would be okay and that I would be okay. My function at that time was about 8%. So I was very, very sick, and was just hoping that when I woke up that I would be feeling normal again. That's really all I could think about was I just wanted to feel normal. Kana and I have known each other for over 25 years. And so leading up to the surgery, we had a lot of conversations, and we gone through all the psychological testing, knowing, understanding all the risks. But I think the thing that we both were so adamant about was making sure that each of us were going to be okay. And I think both of us, the first words that came out of our mouths as we were in our recovery, I know she asked how I was and I asked how she was, because to me that was the most important thing, was to know that she was okay, and then they could tell, anything that was, that had happened with me. But first and foremost, I wanted to know that she was okay because I knew she had this little baby to look after. I unfortunately had some complications during my transplant, so I had to go back into surgery. So we didn't get to see each other until probably 24 hours later. Her surgery was fine. She knew that something hadn't gone right with mine. So it wasn't until, the next day that we were able to see each other. And I remember instantly the metallic taste being gone from my mouth, and being able to pee. I think I peed like 9 liters in 24 hours, with her kidney, because I just wasn't peeing very much before my transplant, because my kidney failure was so poor. And for her, she comments all the time how she saw my eyes were white and my skin was pink again. I didn't have the jaundice looking feeling. And so she knew that I was, for all intents and purposes, alive, and that my body was functioning and back to that, comment of being normal to some degree. It was really, really incredible, quite overwhelming, and certainly, a miracle in all intents and purposes. After my transplant, well, the recovery was longer. In my case, I was just so excited to get back into the sports, and particularly the running that I love to do. But I had, as I mentioned earlier, some complications. So I ended up having an abdominal hernia repair 9 months after my transplant surgery. And it probably took me a good 3 years to be able to work back up to running 5Ks and even doing a couple half marathons post surgery. I discovered the transplant games here in the United States, and it was really great to connect with other recipients who were either amateur or professional athletes who were able to get back into sports to some degree. And that gave me a lot of inspiration and hope. I was able to work full time. I had been before, but in a limited role. And post my transplant, I was able to get back into more management type roles that I had to give up a few years as my health was declining, and traveling around the world again. I was more cautious, but I was able to go back to third world countries and just use, more safeguards. But I love to travel, and with this gift, and Kana will say the same thing. She gave it to me so that I could resume living my life as normal as possible and to not live in a bubble. And for me, that meant traveling around the world, doing sports, working in life sciences, and doing the normal things that I love to do. It's been 11 and a half years since my kidney transplant, and I'm just so grateful for the gift that Kana gave me, because it's allowed me to live a very full life. In retrospect, I think there's so many things in my life that I would not have pursued or would not have done if I didn't have this medical circumstances. It really, for me, it really highlighted what's important in life, and it really highlighted making the most of it every single day, and to also pay it forward. So I do a lot of work in sharing my story. I do a lot of work with transplant diagnostics. I do a lot of things to fulfill passions of mine, because I feel like there was a point in my life where that was all going to be taken away, or would have been significantly compromised if I was reliant on a dialysis machine to keep me alive. And knowing that I'm 11 years out, I also know I'm past a lot of the odds of, the survival rate with the transplant, as well as those with on dialysis. And yet I don't want those limits put on me. I don't want to hear those statistics, because I'm all about beating those odds and being the data that may be out there. The relationship I have with Kana is stronger than it was. We've known each other for a couple of decades, but she really is like a sister to me, and I'm just so humbled and grateful for her gift. Every year we celebrate what I call my rebirth day, but it's really hard to find ways to say thank you to her. And so we always try and do a spa date. But I think the most impactful way that I can show my gratitude is by living my life as fully as possible, by taking care of this gift, by trying to be as healthy as possible, and by paying it forward. Just as she paid it forward to me, I can now take this gift and pay it forward by hopefully working with transplant diagnostic scientists, as well as the patient community, in spreading advocacy and education about the beauty and the necessity of organ donation. Looking back, the only regret I have is deciding not to have children. I had made that decision in my 30s when I understood how the polycystic kidney gene worked, and I just didn't want to put a child through what I had gone through, watching my mom on dialysis and then eventually get a transplant. I think in retrospect, though, it's allowed me to have more time to invest in the community in terms of spreading awareness for organ donation, as well as working with the scientific community to improve the patient care aspect for recipients pre and post transplant. And so while I have regrets, I think it's also been a blessing, because it's allowed me the freedom to hopefully make an impact for current and future generations. Throughout this medical and transplant journey to date, one of the things I've learned is just the beauty of humanity. I'm in such awe of those who are willing to become living donors, especially altruistic living donors, as well as all the donor families who make those difficult decisions in a very tragic time of their experiences just to save the life of somebody else, to save the life of somebody like me or my mom or my sister, all of us who have received transplants in a variety of ways. And so that has been probably the biggest takeaway is having the restoration of faith in just people want to do good. And it also extends to just the transplant teams and transplant diagnostics teams and just all the medical teams who understand the importance of this circle of life and doing what they can to take these gifts and extend the life of another human being. My advice to those in need of a kidney is to not lose hope, to talk to your family, your friends, your coworkers, your church groups, but let them know what's going on, because I know for me, I kind of didn't want to share how sick I was. And in retrospect, I think more potential living donors could have come forward if they understood the gravity of the situation. And I would also know that there's a whole community of people who are here to support you. I'm one of them, and that you're not alone going through this journey, and hopefully hearing other stories on this platform like mine show you that you can have your life back to some semblance of normal again with a kidney transplant.